Hi guys, and welcome. I am Enigmius, and this is episode 23 of the Builder's Guide to Feed the Beast. Today we're continuing with our large-scale auto-crafting system, or more specifically, we're starting over with it. In this episode, we're going to talk about why we're starting over. We're going to talk about what was wrong with the previous iteration on the concepts, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do differently. So you can see here I'm standing in the middle of a mess, and we're going to come back over and take a look at this mess in detail momentarily. But first, we need to kind of figure out what the hell went wrong. Now, if you recall in the previous episode, we were set up over here with some managers, and we had an ender chest receiving materials from upstairs with the manager in front of it distributing items to other managers in the network, which were then feeding them to auto-crafting tables. And that was the beginning of the process. And then realistically, had it all come together, we would have just continued that for everything until it made what we wanted it to make. Now, the difficulty that I encountered was the expense. And I'm not talking about the expense in terms of the machines. I'm talking about the expense in terms of the materials. Now, to illustrate, this is the manager, one of the managers that we had set up previously, and I left it here just so that I could demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. You can see here, it wants 3 stacks of coal dust and 24 flint, which is not expensive at all. I mean, we're talking about a tech-based mod that includes all kinds of crazy fun ways to gather a tremendous amount of resources. 3 stacks of coal to convert to coal dust, not a big deal, which is when we were starting the project, I was like, okay, we're doing all right. It's not that big of an issue. But when you consider it in this context, basically what we have upstairs is a retriever set to grab 3 stacks of coal to be pushed through and turned into coal dust. And then we grab those 3 stacks of coal dust and 24 flint and send them down here to the ender chest. And then you've got this manager here saying, give me the coal dust and the flint. So already we're basically doubling the material requirement, actually tripling the material requirement for each Ultimate Hybrid solar panel for these guys here, because we're making the coal chunks, which is the compressed coal ball, which is these guys right here, just with the machines telling them what to grab specifically to send down here so that we're grabbing exactly the materials that we want. We're tripling the material requirement because we need the materials to make the actual item, we need the materials to tell the manager what to grab specifically, and the materials to tell the retriever what specifically to grab. That's where I ran into some difficulty, was justifying, not so much with this, because again, it's cheap, but then you look at the more expensive items like this, and all of a sudden, do you want to triple the cost when you need 2 of these? Do you really want to triple the cost just so that you can have a nice, clean, efficient crafting system that grabs exactly what it needs? I couldn't justify showing you guys that kind of system and saying, yeah, this is good. I didn't think that would be fair. I think there's another way to look at it that will allow us to dramatically cut down on the materials we need just to teach machines what to pull. And then, the thing is, managers are really, really useful machines. An example that I can think of right off the top of my head where these would be fantastic is if you were using the compact solar panels mod and you wanted to make solar arrays. Managers would be ideally suited to that kind of thing. So if I get enough feedback from people saying, I'm using compact solars and I'd like to see that kind of system, then by all means, I'll demonstrate it. But for the Ultimate Hybrid, when we start getting into the really expensive stuff, no, I don't think that managers are ideally suited to managing the inventories of that kind of a setup. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to set this aside for now. I'll probably pull this down to make room for the new system later. And like I say, if you want to see the compact version, the compact solar panels mod version, then I will show you that, or at least enough of it that you can take it and run. But this is the replacement in terms of managing materials. And you can see this is sort of the heart and soul of what's going to be doing that. But before we get into that, I'll just do kind of a quick overview so it doesn't seem like quite such a mess, and then we can get into that. So basically we've got a chest here pretending to be the equivalent of the ender chest over there, receiving materials from wherever. And then I've got a transposer grabbing or set to grab items from that chest. Now, normally I would use a filter for that kind of job. If I wanted to use any kind of block, whatever, to pull items on a pulse, I would pull with a filter because it'll pull by the stack. The transposer will only pull items individually, and in this case, this is one of the rare cases where that's exactly what I want, is pulling items individually. And then it sends items through this tube here, and it actually cycles back around into the chest. So that's what all of this is. So it's really not as messy as it seems until we get down here. Now you can see I've got a filter here with the red thing here. That's how you can tell the difference. This guy doesn't have it. This guy does. This is a filter. He's currently basically set to off. It won't receive any items now because it's receiving a redstone signal. But he's set up to grab pistons out of this tube when it's not receiving that signal. That's sort of his function there, is to grab a specific kind of item out of the tube. And I could have different kinds, you know, I could have up to 9 different kinds of items that would each pull whatever. It's best, I would say at this point, to just do it individually, individual items, and then if we want to combine later, we can. And then he's going to send those items that he passes, you know, pulls out of the tube into this item detector. Now you'll notice I've got a tube between the item detector and a tube between the item detector and the chest. That's because I noticed when I put this guy directly adjacent to the filter that this guy jammed immediately. First item that he pulled, he jammed. He wouldn't send it into the item detector. It had to be a tube. And I read some, you know, in the wiki that it had to be a tube here as well. So that's why it's set up that way. And you could tell he's just like an item sorter with the graphic 2 eyes in the mouth with the little tongue sticking out, giving you the raspberry. Really straightforward. Now the item detector, he doesn't sort anything. He doesn't route anything. He doesn't have an inventory really. Well, he does, but nobody seems to know what it's for. And I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Basically, every time an item passes through this guy or a stack of items, he will generate a redstone pulse. And what kind of pulse he generates depends on how you set this little guy here. The default, which is what we will use, is that he will generate a pulse for every item that passes through him. That includes, if you pass a stack of 64 items through him, he will generate 64 individual pulses. Now, the second option is that if you send a stack through him, he'll only generate 1 pulse, which is not particularly accurate because it doesn't matter if it's a stack of 16 or a stack of 64, it'll still generate 1 pulse. So we can't use that for the counting that we need. And the third option is he generates a redstone signal if he's backstuffed, which I can't see us ever really using. If that changes, I'll let you know. But long story short, we just need him on the default setting, and we should be good. Now you understand maybe a little bit better why we're using the transposer, is so that it's grabbing individuals and sending them through the item detector slow enough that he can keep up with the pulses. Otherwise, you know, if you send a couple stacks of 64 through this guy, he takes a really long time to generate all those pulses, and it's too long in order for this to be a viable way of counting the items going through the system. Now, the one thing that I will say is when I set this up for reals, so to speak, over here, I will have the pulse on probably a 2-second interval. Right now it's set at the 0.5-second interval because I'm using my wireless receiver to generate it. And I'm not going to go digging through the floor downstairs to adjust the transmitters. So that's why I've got that too fast. I'm just being straight up with you right now. It is too fast to make this work properly, but I can still demonstrate the basic concept. So we've got items coming through here. If it happens to be a piston, it'll get pushed through the item detector and then out through into this chest. The item detector is generating pulses and sending the pulses to this guy, which is a counter. This is another redstone logic circuit, and this is going to be one of the central items that we'll be using that make this system work is the counter. And I'm just going to pull them up here to reset them the quick and easy way. And make sure that... So I set this guy up, and I kind of looked at it, and it didn't really make... I understood how it worked, but in terms of actually looking at it and being able to figure out, it wasn't really all that helpful. So I'm going to explain it now. You can see it's got the redstone conduit passing through it. Like a lot of other blocks, you basically assume this is an input. It's actually 2 inputs. This is the negative side, we'll call it. This is the positive side. When it gets a redstone signal on this side, it adds to the counter value. And when it gets a redstone signal on this side, it subtracts from the counter value. And then it's got this little pointer here that's currently pointing to this, call it, it's a cathode, but you could call it the head of the redstone torch or whatever, which is lit up, saying it's at 0 because it's all the way negative. Then if you right click on the counter itself, you can see you can set what the maximum value is. So it's currently set to 10, and we'll talk about increment and decrement momentarily. But maximum count 10. So each time it receives a redstone pulse on this side, it will increment, and you'll actually see this pointer move around until it points to this cathode here. When it does, and when it reaches 10, this will light up and it will send a redstone signal out this side. That's the redstone signal that was going to the filter and causing the filter to stop receiving any items. So if that just went by really, really fast, it's like, whoo, over your head. You're like, I regret even starting this video. That's fine. I'm just giving you the overview. You don't have to, ace it in this episode necessarily. I just want you to have a general idea of what we're doing, and then it'll make more sense as we go along. But that's what we're using the counter for. Now, in the simplest sense, what we want it to do is count whatever specific number of items we want into the chest for our auto crafting table, and then send a signal to the filter that stops it from accepting any more. And then we'll set up the system so that any overflow goes back into our storage wall. Now, it may not seem as clean and concise as we might like it. It's not how I would do it for an inexpensive auto crafting project, but for an ultimate hybrid solar panel where we're talking diamonds and UU matter, I'm more than happy to have a little bit of overflow as long as it's cycling back somewhere where I can access it for other projects. That's the main thing. So what we will end up doing is we'll be adding some logic to the system so that, for example, if it's got a maximum count of 10 and it gets 10 pulses on the positive side, in increments by 1, it's basically counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what the increment by 1 means. When it reaches 10, it sets the signal, and then it's stuck there until you decrement it, subtract numbers all the way back down to 0. The easiest way to do that is set the decrement value to 10. So when you send a redstone pulse on the negative side, it's going to immediately take it from 10 to 0 and reset the counter. Now, the way I'm doing it is just enough to illustrate how that works. We'll be doing it a little bit more intelligently when we actually set up the crafting system. So for now, we'll just kind of fire it up and give you an opportunity to see exactly how it works. So you can see that's good. That's set up. That's yep, everything is ready to go. We'll just carry on. You can see items are moving. And you can see pistons are passing through, and you can see the pointer is incrementing. It's moving closer and closer towards the cathode on this side for every item that passes through the item detector. And then as soon as it reaches that cathode, the cathode lights up, sends the redstone signal. The filter will no longer receive any items. Now, the reason why I pointed out 0.5 seconds is too fast is because before we got the signal to the filter to say stop grabbing items, the extra piston had already snuck through, this guy here. So we got our 10. If we had slowed it down so that we weren't receiving pistons so fast, we would have been able to turn off the filter before that 11th piston came through. So that's why we're going to use a slower pulse, because the whole thing about the auto crafting system is it's not like you push a button and then you stand there and wait for it to work. This is the kind of thing that we have going in the background. We're not even thinking about it, right? It's not a big deal if it's only moving one item out of 500 every 2 seconds because you're off mining or, doing whatever you want to do. So it's not that big of a deal slowing it down. Now, if we want to start this whole process over again, we need to get a pulse on the negative side to reset this counter so that it goes, see, just like that. So we gave it that pulse. As soon as it got the pulse, it dropped this down to 0, which turned off the signal. And that's why that's not lit up anymore. But you can see it's reset back to 0. Like I say, we're going to do it a little bit more elegantly and a little bit more usefully so that we're actually managing multiple item detectors at the exact same time using other logic gates. Now that was painful. I'm not going to lie, getting through that process of saying, how do I want to set this up if I can't use managers and retrievers to do it slick and, elegant? It took a little while. And the Logistics Pipes fans are going to say, ha ha ha, all I have to do is this. And that's cool. That's fine. I'm doing it with Red Power because I like Red Power. I like the challenge so that I don't make Quantum Armor and complain that the game is over, I guess would be one way of saying it. So that's where we're going to stop today, because that's plenty of information for you to kind of mull over. If you want to rewind, watch a little, particular segment over again, by all means, you're welcome to do that. The next episode, we're actually going to take this concept and we're going to start translating it into something that actually does something. I'm going to clear that out. We're going to get it working. We're going to start crafting the different components, and then we'll start to see how the logic, the red power logic blocks start to come into play as well. So I hope that was helpful. I apologize for the delay in between episodes. Like I say, I've been busy and there's a certain amount of planning that had to go into this. But once it starts to come together, I think it'll look kind of neat and it'll work kind of neat as well. So if you want to see the next episode as soon as it comes out, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already. I'll probably have that one out in the next day or two. So thanks for watching, guys, and take care.